It's 5:30 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. Time for the world today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the program. Denmark says drones flown over its airport appear to be the work of a professional actor. Hungary warns of escalation amid the Russia-Ukraine war, backing President Donald Trump's peace plan. Plus, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy found guilty of criminal conspiracy in Libya case. You're already here. Let's begin the world today. Denmark says drones flown over its airports appear to be the work of a professional actor, but there was no evidence of Russian involvement after such activity disrupted its airspace for the second time in a week. Reports say the Aalborg airport was forced to shut down for several hours today after green lights were spotted overhead, while Billund Airport also briefly closed. 3 smaller airports also reported drone activity. On Monday, Copenhagen Airport temporarily closed due to a drone incursion. The country's defense minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, told a news conference the hybrid attack was part of a systematic operation, but said the devices had been launched locally. Drones pose a risk of colliding with planes, particularly during takeoff or landing. Halting air traffic can cause delays and divert flights elsewhere. Russia has been accused of conducting hybrid attacks in the past, and Europe has been on high alert after several NATO member states reported Russian incursions in their airspaces. In other news, NATO has issued a warning to Russia after a series of airspace violations over Estonia, Poland and Romania. During urgent talks on Tuesday, the alliance accused Moscow of ramping up its campaign of incursions in NATO member states. For more now, let's turn to the Deutsche Welle's correspondent Chiponda Chimbelu, who's in Berlin for a much better understanding of the issue. Chiponda, great to see you. What is the latest?
Well, on Tuesday, U.S. President Donald Trump said NATO should shoot down Russian jets that enter the airspace of NATO member states. Now, that statement came on the same day that the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested NATO countries only intercept Russian jets rather than shooting them down. Now, that, of course, suggests a bit of ambiguity coming from the White House. But also on Tuesday, we did hear from NATO itself, which did say it would use all the necessary military and non-military tools to defend itself as it faces a pattern of what it calls increasing irresponsible behavior by Moscow. Now, last Friday, Estonia said 3 Russian fighter jets violated its airspace for 12 minutes before being escorted out by NATO Italian fighter jets. The Kremlin has denied it entered Estonian airspace, but of course that is something that is very difficult for people in Europe to believe, given that Russia now has a series of reports of airspace incursions across parts of Europe. NATO members Norway, Poland, Romania and Croatia have all reported airspace violations by Russia this year alone.
How is the alliance expected to respond to this?
Well, some security analysts say that Russia may be violating the airspace of NATO member states to see how far it can go and what the alliance's response will be. So far, what we have seen following the latest incursion in Estonia is that country invoke the alliance's Article 4. Now, that allows NATO members to consult on a matter of security linked to a member state, and that is what we saw happening on Tuesday. That is, of course, something that also Poland did earlier this month after it shot down Russian drones that had entered its airspace. Now, these consultations can lead to a joint decision on action by NATO, but it doesn't require the alliance to come up with a collective response. Now, that is something that would, of course, only happen in a case where a NATO member invokes Article 5, which pretty much says that an attack on one member state is an attack on the whole alliance.
So what should we be looking out for in the coming days?
We should be looking to Denmark as well. That's where there was another drone incident this week. Airports in Copenhagen and Oslo were closed for hours on Monday night. And that was after unidentified drones in the airspace led to the cancellation of dozens of flights. Now, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, said that she could not rule out that Russia was behind that incident. So we do have to wait and see what more the Danish authorities can say about it. Now, in terms of NATO, the alliance has been ramping up its security. It launched a mission called Eastern Sentry this month, and that is an effort to better protect its Eastern European member states. Now, that mission is pretty much a response to Russia's violation of Polish airspace 2 weeks ago. Now, the mission integrates military capabilities that can better deal with drones, which have been, of course, widely used in Russia's airspace violations.
Chipunda, thanks again for speaking with us and for, of course, the reporting on the issue. So the third day of speeches at the United Nations General Debate is underway. Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó has blasted the European Union's war strategy, warning the sanctions harm Europe more than Russia. He added that the Ukraine conflict has been globalized and criticized Brussels for dragging Hungary into war, stressing that all wars end at the negotiating table and not on the battlefield. Mr. Szijjártó vowed that Hungary will support peace efforts, including Donald Trump's initiatives and potential US-Russia talks, while ensuring the Hungarian people remain safe.
Daily efforts in order to be able to stay out of this war. Regardless all the efforts to drag us into this war and to provocate us into this war. It is the obligation and the duty of the Hungarian government to make sure that the security of the Hungarian people and Hungary itself is being guaranteed. Mr. President, since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Hungary has been standing up for ceasefire and peace talks. Unfortunately, we used to be under serious attacks, serious political attacks, accusations and stigmatization for this position of ours. Very rude accusation by those who are now speaking about the importance of ceasefire and peace talks, by the same countries in Europe. And I have to tell you that if these countries who used to stigmatize us for this position of ours had not attacked us for this position, but had they argued in favor of ceasefire and peace talks from the very beginning, as we have been doing so, we could have saved lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And we could have avoided huge refugee waves. And we could have prevented a lot of destruction. But Europe, the European Union, has chosen a bad strategy, a failed strategy. Instead of isolating the war in Ukraine, this war has been globalized. The sanction packages the European Union has introduced have absolutely not fulfilled the expectations. They have caused more harms to the European economy than to the Russian one. And parallel to that, hundreds of billions of euros have been sent to Ukraine in the form of cash and weapons. Every day which goes on in this war brings forward the risk of escalation. All day spent in this war comes up with new casualties and destruction.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima, in his address to the United Nations General Assembly, called for a permanent seat for Nigeria at the Security Council as part of a wider process of institutional reform at the UN. Vice President Shettima also warned that the global body must embrace sweeping restructuring or face growing irrelevance as world events increasingly bypass its influence.
negotiate truces when
It's the second day of general debate at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. One after the other, leaders rise to address those gathered, speaking with passion and great resolve.
Powerful are righteous.
Eventually, it's the turn of Nigeria.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Kashim Shettima.
Vice President Kashim Shettima, who is representing President Bola Tinubu at the event, emphasized that the occasion of the Union's 80th anniversary calls for frank introspection. He proposes 4 key reforms needed by the Union. Key is the need for structural reform of the United Nations and a permanent seat on the UN Security Council for Nigeria.
Our case for permanent seat at the Security Council is a demand for fairness, for representation, and for reform that restores credibility to the very institution upon which the hope of multilateralism rests.
He states clearly Nigeria's position on the conflict in the Middle East.
We do not believe that the sanctity of human life should be trapped in the corridors of endless debate. That is why we say, without stuttering and without doubt, that a two-state solution remains the most dignified path to lasting peace for the people of Palestine. The people of Palestine are not collateral damage in a civilization searching for order. They are human beings, equal in worth, entitled to the same freedoms and dignities that the rest of us take for granted.
Radical reforms to the global financial system is also proposed.
I'm calling for new and binding mechanism to manage sovereign debt, a sort of international court of justice for money that will allow emerging economies to escape the economic straitjacket of primary production of unprocessed exports. It has been over 4 decades since the Lagos Plan of Action outlined a route away from debt and dependence that highlighted opportunities that today should still be explored for local added value for processing and manufacturing in everything from agriculture to solid minerals and petrochemicals.
He insists that countries producing strategic minerals must benefit fairly from those minerals in terms of investment, partnership, local processing, and jobs, and for the closing of the digital divide across the world. Ending, he says, for none of us is safe until all of us are safe.
The road ahead will not be easy, and we know there are no quick fixes to the trials that test the human spirit. I thank you.
Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
Of course, for UN reforms were continued by Namibia's President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah and her Congolese counterpart, Denis Nguesso. In her address to the UNGA, President Nandi-Ndaitwah criticized sanctions against Cuba, Venezuela and Zimbabwe, calling them violations of the UN Charter. She also warned of a genocide against the Palestinian people, pointing to restricted aid to Gaza and saying failure to act could become the moral failure that defines this era. Congo's Nguesso called for the restructuring of the United Nations, also advocating for Africa's complete participation in global decision-making process.
We can no longer delay the urgent call to redress the historical injustice to Africa and address our call for equitable and balanced representation on the Security Council. Madam President, the Charter of the United Nations has laid the foundation for conditions necessary for peaceful coexistence and harmony among nations. Therefore, unilateral cohesive measures should not be used as a tool to undermine sovereign state, for this violates the Charter and the principle of the United Nations.
France's former president Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to 5 years in jail after being found guilty of criminal conspiracy in a case related to millions of euros of illicit funds from the late Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. The Paris Criminal Court acquitted him of all other charges, including passive corruption and illegal campaign financing. Speaking to reporters after the hearing, the 70-year-old, who was president of France from 2007 to 2012, said the verdict was extremely serious for rule of law. He claims the case is politically motivated and was accused of using the funds from Gaddafi to finance his 2007 election campaign. The U.S. White House has been instructing federal agencies to prepare for mass firings if Congress fails to avert a government shutdown next week. According to the Office of Management and Budgets, the move to reduce federal workforce if the government does shut down escalates the stakes of a potential shutdown next week. The OMB has asked agencies to identify programs, projects, and activities where discretionary funding will lapse on October 1st and an alternative funding source is available. For those areas, OMB directed agencies to begin drafting plans that would go beyond standard furloughs, permanently eliminating jobs in programs not consistent with President Donald Trump's priorities in the event of a shutdown. Now, if by October 1st there is a shutdown, programs such as Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, military operations, law enforcement, immigration and customs enforcement, customs and border protection, and air traffic control will continue. China has begun operations clearing up the debris from the super typhoon Ragasa that slammed into Guangdong province, leaving the widespread damage we're seeing there. Crews have been clearing up uprooted trees and debris from flooded roads as residents return to damaged homes and businesses. Major cities including Guangzhou, Macau, and Shenzhen were affected by the destructive winds and rains. Ragasa had caused severe damage to Taiwan and the Philippines. 17 people were said to have lost their lives in Taiwan after Maitan Creek Lake overflowed. The number was later downgraded to 14. 10 people were killed in the Philippines in the natural disaster. A crew have been clearing uprooted trees and debris from roads, trying to get life back as normal as possible in southern China. Back here in Africa, Malawi's former president Peter Mutharika has been declared winner of last week's election in a huge comeback for the 85-year-old. The Election Commission of Malawi made the announcement stating he won 57% of the vote, beating 70-year-old President Lazarus Chakwera, who took 33%. President Chakwera, who was a pastor before entering politics, conceded defeat early and called Mr. Mutharika to congratulate him on his historic win. Mutharika previously served as president from 2014 to 2020 when he lost to Mr. Chakwera by a wide margin. He returns to office now amid an economic crisis with severe shortages of fuel and foreign currency and inflation of nearly 30%.
$165,170, imene inali 33.0%. Professor Arthur Peter Mutharika achipani cha DPP apeza mavoti okwana 3,035,249, imene inali 56.8%. I declare candidate Professor Arthur Peter Mutharika as the President-elect and Justice Dr. Jane Mayemo Ansah AC retired as the President and Vice President-elect of the Republic of Malawi following the September 25 presidential general election.
Finally on the show, this one is for all the car lovers heading to Dubai right now for the future of transport and the hosting of a major global summit on self-driving vehicles. This event was held under the theme Redefining Mobility, the Path to Autonomy. It was attended by more than 3,000 participants in 45 workshops and with over 80 speakers. Companies unveiled cutting-edge technologies, including Tensor, built as the first level 4 autonomous car that can be privately owned. The two-day Congress, which holds today and tomorrow, features dozens of workshops and panel discussions bringing together government officials, researchers and industry leaders to chart the future of driverless mobility.
Tensor is unique in the world as the very first car that you can own, personally own, that is an L4 or level 4 autonomous vehicle. What does that mean? It means that it's hands off, eyes off, not having to worry about anything but riding in the car while Tensor takes the wheel. This car is also the very first agentic vehicle, which means this car will learn from you. It will understand your daily rhythms and help get you to a place on time and even remind you sometimes if you are running a little bit late.
Well, that can come in useful, running a bit late. Thanks for watching The World Today. I am Amarachi Ubani.